Hi, music history friends. Mr. Smith here. We're going to do something a little bit different this week. I'm going to try this out and see how it works for you. You've got this video, and it should have come along with a series of links to a bunch of things that I want you to watch in another tab as we go through this. So I'll let you know when it's time to pause this video and then go watch some other videos and then come back to this for us to be able to learn some stuff. Let's practice this. I sent you a link that has 2 stupid videos in it. Go ahead and watch those stupid videos, and then come back here. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed those. We're going to start our lesson today about Caribbean music. Now, this, just like the other world music that we learned about, like Celtic and Indian classical music, actually does have a connection to the next modern music that we're going to learn about. So even though this might seem fairly different, Caribbean music is actually very influential and really, really interesting when it comes to the next modern music we're going to learn about, which is hip-hop. All right, so Caribbean music. First off, it's pronounced Caribbean, not Caribbean. Those stupid movies kind of ruined everything for us. Caribbean, not Caribbean. Just like it's Celtic and not Celtic. Celtic, not Celtic. Caribbean, not Caribbean. It's important. All right, so let's learn about some stuff. As always, we're going to start with a map. Now, you might need to pause this if you want to and look at this a little bit better. I sent a link to a much larger version of this map so you can look at it in more detail, because it's a little hard to see on the screen, I know. But there are a couple of islands that I'm going to require you to know about. Now, these islands collectively together are the Caribbean islands, and you can roughly see where they're located. You can see that Miami is up there to the north, which is obviously in Florida. We've got the northern coast of South America down at the bottom. And on the left-hand side, you can see lots of the big parts of Central America. Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador. The very southern tip of Mexico is down there, the Yucatan Peninsula. But the first big country that we're going to learn about, and the first island that we're going to learn about, is going to be Jamaica. So Jamaica is located right here, if you can follow my mouse. Excuse me. Jamaica is a fairly small island in the Caribbean. It's just south of the much larger Cuba, which is another island that we're going to learn about. Cuba, which is right here, very, very large island. Cuba is located about 90 miles off of the coast of Florida, so it's quite close to the United States, both geographically and, as we're going to learn here soon, culturally and historically. So we've got Cuba, which is the big long island here. We've got Jamaica, which is the smaller island just south of Cuba. Here we have an island that has on it 2 separate countries, both of which have a very interesting history that we'll be talking a little bit about. Haiti, which is on the western part, and the Dominican Republic, which is on the eastern part. Just to the east of Dominican Republic is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a really interesting island. It is not a separate country because Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. It is a territory of the United States. And all the people who live in Puerto Rico are actually U.S. citizens. They're allowed to move to the United States the same way that you're allowed to move to the United States, which is to say, you just do it. You just move. A person from Puerto Rico can move to any spot in the United States in the same way that you can move to Puerto Rico. You don't have to do anything. There's no customs. There's no legal issues. You just move to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not a state. It is a territory, which is a very unusual position for a place to be because there aren't many territories of the United States. You get things like Guam and some random islands out in the Pacific. Puerto Rico is actually a very, very populated territory. It is larger than many states population-wise and geographically, and really probably should be at this point the 51st state. If you're interested in that, there's a video that you can watch to see about this weird kind of place that Puerto Rico occupies. And when this video is done, feel free to check that out. It's in the bonus video area in the list of videos that I've sent to you. Here we have what are called the Antilles, the British Virgin Islands. Some of these are complicated, and some of them are actually separate countries. Some of them are a part of the European Union. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on down here. And I'm not gonna test you about any of those things. However, this right down here at the very bottom of your screen is Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad is the larger of the island. Tobago is a little tiny island you can just barely see out on this picture. But together, those two islands form a country, collectively known as Trinidad and Tobago. And we are going to be discussing them because they are very, very interesting historically. So the islands that you're going to be responsible to know are Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Trinidad and Tobago. There are some other more kind of familiar places that you might see up here, like the Bahamas. The Bahamas are their own separate country. They are separate from the United States. People get that confused all the time. But the Bahamas are included here, but you don't have to know about them. But Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Trinidad and Tobago are the countries that I'm going to ask you to know about. All right, let's get into a little bit of stuff, like some instruments. These are the instruments that you're going to be learning about when we learn about the Caribbean music styles. This is a small selection. I could have gone and done a lot more of these, but these are the ones I decided to choose to kind of keep things simple for you. So, the first one are bongos. Go ahead and pause this video and go watch the video for bongos. All right. Bongos are not congas. People get these two confused all the time. Bongos are the little ones. Okay, small little things. They usually are played between your knees, but sometimes you can see them mounted up on a stand, and you hit them with your hands. Occasionally I see people play them with sticks, but usually you just play them with your hands. Takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of practice, but they're fun instruments, they're cheap instruments. So for those of you who are interested in maybe learning how to play a cool hand percussion thing while you're quarantined, get yourself a set of bongos. They're not that expensive. And they're a lot of fun to play. Now, bongos are closely related to the next instrument that we're going to see, which are congas. So go ahead and pause, watch the video for congas. So congas are a lot taller than bongos, obviously a lot larger. They're still membranophones, the same that bongos are, and you play them with your hands, okay? And they have a much deeper sound, and they're also a lot more versatile. You can do a little bit more with a set of congas than you can bongos. For instance, you might have noticed in that video that those drums were all tuned to different notes. That's because you can much more easily tune a conga to play a specific pitch than you can a bongo. So you can do a much more interesting thing with a set of congas. Now, a conga is pronounced conga, by the way, not Congo. Congo is one of two countries in Africa. Conga is an instrument. So don't get those confused. Congo, countries. Conga, instrument. Okay, bongos, little drums. Congas, big drums. You got it. Of course, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to include a cowbell in the video. So notice that you've got a cowbell here. Go ahead and watch the video. So, yes, we can all make the stupid fever jokes about cowbells. But cowbells are legitimate instruments, and they contribute in a big way to several different Caribbean styles of music and Latin American styles of music as well. Cowbells are pretty cool. You can do a lot with them, and they that rhythmic sort of component that they add is pretty cool. Cowbells are also important because they can be included in several other things. You see cowbells very frequently on drum sets, even in rock drum set, jazz drum sets, but you can see them as a part of a larger set of instruments, like the next thing that we're going to talk about, timbales. Go ahead and pause, watch the video I included for timbales. All right, so timbales are the drums themselves. The two drums that you saw in that video are the timbales. You play them with kind of a special drumstick. It's very small and thin, and you hit them in the exact same way that you would like a snare drum. But the two drums are different sizes. Therefore, they play two different pitches, a high and a low pitch. They sound pretty cool, and just playing on the drums themselves sounds pretty awesome. You can also see that playing on the sides of the timbale is really common and has a cool kind of metallic ring to it. But timbales usually also include a cowbell. Sometimes they have like a wood block and even a set of cymbals attached to them. And even though those things are different instruments, timbales almost always include a cowbell, a block, and or cymbals as kind of a part of the thing. So think about this the same way that a drum set has drums and cymbals, different size drums, different size cymbals, but we still call it a drum set as one instrument. The timbales are the similar kind of thing. They have the two drums that are called timbales, but they also have the cowbell, the cymbals, the woodblock that are sort of a part of it. So all together, timbales are a single instrument. All right. Next, we have one of my very, very favorite instruments, not just in Caribbean music, but one of my favorite instruments, period. All right. So, steel drums, man, these are just so awesome. Both because of how they're constructed, but also what they are constructed out of. And we'll get a bit more into this whenever we learn about the history of Trinidad, which will be in a couple of days. But steel drums are just so amazing and so special. The sound they make is so characteristic of calypso, which is the style of music that's popular in Trinidad. But the sound itself has become very, very connected to Caribbean music in general, to the point where a lot of people just assume that as soon as they hear a steel drum, oh, they must be listening to some kind of Caribbean music on a beach somewhere. And they just assume that steel drums all by itself are what make music, Caribbean. And it's more complicated than that. The steel drum has a very, very rich and interesting history, which I'm excited to get into when we get to that. But man, steel drums, they don't get any cooler. All right, finally, we've got the maraca. Maracas are a lot older than you might think. They are based on several different kind of West African instruments that were brought to the Caribbean islands when the Caribbean islands were being colonized and slaves were being brought there. It's a big part of the history that we'll get into here in a moment. But maracas are basically shakers, and this makes classifying them a little bit complicated, but they are idiophones. Maracas are idiophones. You shake them, and the beads or the metal or the rice or whatever is inside the shaker itself slams against the inside of the container, and that's what makes that crazy kind of sound. Maracas actually take a huge amount of skill to play. Like, it's easy just to shake them and be like, oh, cool, I'm playing maracas. Kind of like a cowbell is like, oh, I just slap a cowbell and it's easy. But it actually takes some skill. It is a legitimate instrument, and you can be good at it. Or you can be bad at it, too. So those are the main instruments that I'm going to expect you to know. Bongos, congas, cowbell, timbales, steel drum, and maracas. All right, let's get a little bit into the history of some of these places before we get into more specific things. So I'm back here at the map because this is an easy kind of place to talk about this stuff. Almost all of these islands, Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, basically all of these islands were populated by people before Europeans got there. And this is, again, speaking in broad generalities, but those indigenous people who were there were almost always eliminated, and not always through violence. Those people were eliminated mostly through disease. This, obviously, the time period that we're in now is a little bit strange to talk about, but a lot of the European colonists or explorers who came to the New World brought with them diseases that people in these areas had never experienced, especially smallpox. And those diseases were incredibly damaging to the indigenous people of these areas. And it's not because they were less developed or whatever. It's because they didn't have any immunity to those diseases. Disease immunity is something that is built up in a group of people over a long time. And as we're seeing right now, when you don't have any natural immunity to a new disease, it can be incredibly damaging. And especially smallpox in the Caribbean was hugely detrimental to the people who were indigenous to those islands. And even though at first Columbus and the various explorers who came after Columbus in the late 1400s, even though they weren't wishing any ill will necessarily towards indigenous people, the diseases that those Europeans carried with them didn't care. They infected those people and for the most part eliminated them before any real violence happened. Now, again, that's a very broad generality. There's a lot of history to every single one of these different places. But in general, disease is what eliminated a lot of the indigenous people of these islands. Therefore, the people who are on those islands now are descended from basically two groups of people. The original colonizing Europeans, usually French or Spanish, sometimes other groups, but usually French or Spanish or English, British, and then the slaves that were brought there to work. And each island has its own very particular mixture of those cultural elements. In some places, like Cuba, there is a very large Spanish influence and a lesser degree of the African influence. And that's mostly because there wasn't as much intermingling, we'll call it, between the Spanish and African slaves that were in Cuba. So the groups of people stayed a little bit more separate, and because of that, the culture of Cuba is a little bit more European. That's different from a place like Jamaica, in which there were very, very, very few British colonists on Jamaica, but a huge number of African slaves. And the culture of Jamaica is much more tied to their African roots than they are their European ones. That's a little bit true for Haiti and for various other islands here as well. But broadly, every single one of these places has some sort of a mixture between African culture and some sort of European culture, be that British or French or Spanish. And you can't be too broad about that, because each of these different islands, and sometimes even different regions inside of those islands, have a different mixture culturally of those different elements. And they express themselves in some similar ways, but also in some very, very unique and culturally different ways. So what I'm saying here is, don't just assume that every place in the Caribbean is the same culturally and historically. They really aren't. They have some very, very big differences. Now, for the sake of this conversation and learning about this, we're not going to get into the hugely specific and different aspects of these cultures, but know that there's a lot of information out there, and I would encourage you, if you're interested, to learn about these things. Or if you have family members who are from these islands, or if you have some connection to these places, I would strongly encourage you to learn about them, because there's some just enormously fascinating stuff in the histories and cultures of these different places. And even though they're so close to us, like I said, Cuba is less than 100 miles away from our own borders. It is historically and culturally another world and is so different from us. And most Americans have basically no knowledge of Cuba. Jamaica is one of the most important cultural and musical places in the entire world, especially in the 1950s and 60s. It became one of the biggest cultural influences musically on the entire world. And again, we know hardly anything about it culturally. Puerto Rico is a part of the United States, and most Americans know nothing about it. So I would encourage you to do a little bit of research and maybe find some stuff. I'll try to put some links in the bonus section for you to do a little bit of research and maybe learn a little bit. All right. So that's where we're going to stop the lesson for today. I'll try to have another one of these put up for you later on this week. There is an exit ticket. So once you've gone through the stuff about the map and the instruments, you can watch this as many times as you want, obviously. I want you to go ahead and try to take the exit ticket. And that's going to be your assignment for this week. And it'll also be your attendance for this week. So try to get that done before Sunday at midnight, if you can. I understand if you're having issues of, getting onto Schoology and everything else. I get it. Just do your best. If you're having some problems, feel free to email me as always. Let me know. I'm going to be very flexible, friends. I'm not here to try to make things bad for you. I just want to try to keep things moving. I want to try to keep things learning. I want to try to help you learn a little bit more about stuff as we go. So feel free to email me if there's a problem or if you just want to have a conversation about something. You'll see that on Schoology, there's a link to the exit ticket. Make sure you go through and look at those videos that I posted. Maybe watch one of those bonus videos if you're just, stuck in your house and don't have anything else to do. I'll try to put some good stuff up there for you. All right, friends. Be safe. Make good choices. Wash your freaking hands. Stay home. Bye.